Okay, so this one is about the nature of indemnity. I've been wanting to do this one for a while, but there are other topics I wanted to get out into the open before I discuss this, because it's a crucial component of the emerging new economy, based on the assumption that the new economy that's emerging is going to be founded upon distributed authority, but also self-determination, meaning that every individual is the master of their own destiny. However, within that framework, the mechanism for delegating authority or distributing authority or appointing agents to act on our behalf to fulfill our will is in place. And so self-determination and self-responsibility, very different things. And so I just want to cover that first before we go into indemnity. So self-determination means you are the master of your own destiny. You determine the way in which you want to live. Now, self-responsibility means that you are ultimately responsible for not only the quality of your own life and your own experience, but also for the impact of your influence. And that's a very important thing to understand. And this is why I wanted to make that clear before we move into the topic of indemnity. So self-responsibility means you are responsible for the impact of your influence. So that means that you are understanding and recognizing where the way you express your nature into the ecosystem around you, how that is a source of causation. And this is where indemnity comes in. So human beings, we've created a framework for commerce where you can establish an entity where you can negate the impact of causation. So, and we see this in New Zealand as a limited liability company. So you can establish a fictional entity called a company. You can utilize that company to do harm, and you can negate the impact of causation because of the fact that it's a limited liability company. So how we've compensated for this is through insurers. And so in the commercial world, it's quite normal for, let's say, the director of a company, and even the executive team, to have indemnity insurance. And there's special kinds of insurance for directors and all these kinds of things. But what this does is it means that if there is harm that's done, then there is insurance to negate the impact of that harm, to compensate for the harm. Now, interestingly, the word indemnity, the origins are the meaning of the word, and it's important to understand the origins of words because that's how you understand the originally intended purpose of the word coming into existence. It does get distorted over time. And that is unharm, to unhurt something. So indemnity has the connotation of allowing the harm to take place and then recompensating. So unhurting it, taking the source of the pain and healing it. Now, the problem with, and that's great, that's cool. A company has limited liability, so there are ways that it can avert responsibility. But a company contains human beings making choices that impact other human beings. So it's this strange mechanism that we've put in place to avert responsibility as individuals. We cannot escape that fact. But a responsible company will have indemnity insurance so that they can unhurt people when they've been hurt. Now, here's the problem. It's not preventative. It's like anything that's, prevention is the best cure for anything. In medicine, this has been proven time and time and time again that prevention is the best cure, and is worthy of the investment. And the problem that we have in the commercial world is that prevention is a difficult thing to validate as worthy of investment because there's no obvious ROI. The ROI is the negating of a future painful moment that never arises because you're preventing it from happening, you see. So you're never going to have the data to show that your prevention is preventing future painful moments, other than the statistics showing you that painful circumstances are declining, which is, very difficult to do. So here you have some fatal flaws in the current system as it is. And from my perspective, I believe these are some of the root causes of the major issues with the economic system and framework that we have in place, is that you can avert the impact of cause and effect as an individual with insurance by healing the pain after the fact. That's great. You've got insurance, cool, you're covered, but you're still prepared to go forward and cause pain knowing that you can unhurt someone afterwards. And that's not cool. That's not cool. You're a human being. And this is why I'm always going to advocate for common law infused with statute. Because in common law, it follows the laws of nature, that you're a human being and you are responsible for the impact of your influence. And so if the way that you are expressing your nature into the world is causing harm, then it's to become as self-aware as possible. Now, the reason why you need a hybrid of both is because no one has got a crystal ball. Every human being is born innocent meaning innocent perspective. So they are untainted by belief, dogma. They are untainted by perspective, because a perspective really is a filter that causes you to determine what you believe is possible. And so as you evolve and you become more mature, maturity is simply the process of becoming less and less innocent, where you have very determined and rigid beliefs of how nature works and the reality within which you live in. Whereas a child believes everything's possible. So if you're a child and you're expressing your nature into the world, you're not thinking about the impact of your influence on others. And you can do something as a child. You can act in a way that does do harm. And the impact, so the cause and effect of your behavior is doing harm. But how can you be held responsible if your perspective is innocent? And I'm a firm believer that the way the judicial system evolved was actually to uncover the reality of the state of innocence of a human being. Meaning, was this act that caused harm out of innocence or spite? And so this is the key. Innocent before proven guilty. Guilt means that you were conscious of the harm when you were acting. If you're innocent, then you were unconscious of the harm that you were doing. And really, that's all that matters. That's all that matters. So what is the greatest cure for future pain? Prevention. In order to prevent future pain, what is the most effective tool? Self-awareness. Becoming aware of the impact of your influence. And that is a process that evolves over time as you grow in wisdom and you become self-aware. And anyone truly self-aware is aware of the impact of their influence, whether they're a celebrity, whether whether they have a huge following, whether they're in leadership positions. Someone who's truly self-aware is aware of the impact of their influence on the environment around them. And this is why this is really how the judicial system needs to deal with issues. It is to ascertain the state of awareness of the human being, how innocent was their perspective, and guilt is determined by the deliberate masking of an intentionally harmful act. If you're innocent and you acted in a way that caused the death of another person, you're not guilty. Understand this. If you're innocently going about your day and you act in a way that was born out of innocence, you are not guilty. Understand this. Understand this. So as a society, it's on us to ensure that the environment around an innocent perspective, be that a child or an adult that is still innocent because of a lack of self-awareness. It's up to us to create an environment around them that enables them to evolve and to invest in their own self-awareness for the safety of everybody. And so we're never going to be able to prevent harm completely. Prevention is the best cure. So let's invest in developing the self-awareness of an innocent perspective as early as possible so that they can take ownership of the impact of their influence as early as possible. And for everything outside of that, for every harmful act that does harm, but was born out of innocence, we indemnify it. Very simple. Very simple. And we can structure an entirely new judicial system on this. And it's my hope with the projects I'm involved with that we can begin to trial these things through decentralized organizations, autonomous organizations that choose to govern themselves, that are mature enough and evolved enough to appoint joint arbitrators to arbitrate on these matters, and who approach any painful circumstances where harm is done from the perspective of unearthing the state of awareness of the human being that caused the harm. How innocent was their perspective? The intention to do harm is the source of guilt. Unintentionally doing harm is born out of innocence, and we indemnify that. But if the harm was done from a guilty conscience, then restitution is what is required. You are responsible for the impact of your influence. Understand this. And so for an innocent perspective as a society, we can easily provide insurance to underwrite the future harm that will come from the innocence of a perspective. And as we become mature adults, say 18 years of age, whatever it may be, we can say, okay, you've got a level of self-awareness. You're now aware that the impact of your influence on the environment around you is your responsibility, and to be aware of that. And so it's time to indemnify yourself. And so the standardization of it being normalized for every adult human being, either provided for the government, if that's what we decide we want to do, or that's easily accessible so that every individual human being who is engaging in and transacting in the economy, the formal economy, is indemnified to protect future harmful moments caused by the innocence of their perspective. Now, the other issue in the system is that you can indemnify yourself from a purposefully harmful act. And that is not something I'm prepared to accept, and that's something I'm going to, I'm actively involved with, and I've run multiple experiments to challenge a variety of assumptions that I have around this. And it's very interesting to see, to unearth this truth by applying pressure. There have been scenarios where I've purposefully and intentionally engaged in a dispute, where I've become aware that someone may choose to enforce, commercial law, and utilize intimidation for commercial gain, because there's a legal agreement that exists. But I've done that in a situation where the innocence of my perspective has been purposefully been exploited. You see? And I work, some of you know, I work for a government agency in New Zealand called Callaghan Innovation, and so I'm working with founders of startups all the time. And this is one of the things that is rife, and we can't stand it. And it's that, a founder is often an inventor, not a commercial beast, new to the business world, new to commerce. What does limited liability mean? They begin the journey being the CEO of their own company, and it's a minefield. And unfortunately, the ecosystem is rife with companies that are used to dealing with startups, and they have a culture surrounding them that expects the founder of a startup to be an expert in everything. And, we see quite a few issues. So that's not something I'm prepared to accept. And, something I'm absolutely not prepared to accept is utilizing the legal system as a mechanism for intimidating an individual, an innocent individual, into doing something against their will. And these are the challenges and the vulnerabilities within the current legal system that, if we collectively decide as we the people that we want to have self-determination, that we want to be self-responsible, then we have to take responsibility for the impact of our influence on the environment around us. We have to take responsibility for the level of self-awareness that we have, and we have to actively invest our time and energy into becoming more wise and more self-aware, and understanding the true impact, the causation of our influence on the environment. And it's something I think about often because, I've got a very unusual perspective. It's aberrant. There's nobody around me that's going to validate most of what I share, because it's original thought. I don't read books or anything like that. It's all of the concepts that I come up with they arise from within me. I've discovered them within myself through the process of self-awareness. And so when you're prepared to share an original thought, It has the potential to disrupt, but also it has the potential to do harm, especially if it's misinterpreted. And so there's a balancing act. It's like, okay, am I going to share this perspective? Who could it potentially harm if I shared it with? What would happen if someone misinterpreted this? And all you can ever come back to, the only thing you can ever come back to is, what is my intent? Am I pure of intent in sharing this information? Am I intending to do harm? And that is the measure of what innocence is. That you've expressed your nature into the ecosystem around you from a state and a perspective of innocence. And if that is the reality, then you are not guilty, despite the consequences. Understand? And so this is where I want this to segue into punishment. Punishment is not the same as compensation. It's not the same as restitution. It's not even the same as retribution. Retribution is actually a word that evolved out of reattribution. And so the intent, retribution sounds, like quite a brutal word. I'm seeking retribution. But in reality, this is how the universe works. It's seeking to reattribute wherever behavior is causing weakness in the system. So in essence, if a vulnerability is exposed to the point where it can be exploited, then that vulnerability is hardened and strengthened. And the reattribution of something that is weak, it is derived from a surplus elsewhere. Wherever there is a surplus, wherever there is energy coagulating and stagnating, the universe is utilizing that as a surplus. And this is why stagnation is so important to spot early on, because everything that is stagnating is actually in the process of preparing itself to be reconstituted. It's the state of inertia that is something that has been evolving and expanding, coming to a complete halt and becoming petrified. And anything that becomes petrified is getting itself into a state within which it can be diffused very easily. And if you look at, a common scenario is someone takes their dog for a walk, the dog goes on someone's front lawn, goes for a poo, and then the dog walker walks off, and the turd's left there for however long, and eventually turns white, turns into powder. And ultimately, nature knows that if that unutilized resource is powder, then it can be carried by the wind and diffused very effectively. And this is how nature works. Stagnation is the birth of a surplus that is preparing itself to be diffused into the ecosystem as widely as possible, so that as many aspects of life have the potential to receive that surplus. And again, nature tells us everywhere that a universal basic income is an essential component of an ecosystem that is purposefully assembled to be a self-regulating, perpetual, eternal, wealth-generating system. So, punishment, reattribution, everything that is vulnerable is in the process of receiving surplus from elsewhere. That's just how nature works. Punishment is spite. And so this is, I'm aware that my tone is a little bit confrontational, but that's intentional. Because I want to hold the mirror up to us as a society right now and to say, well, if our justice system if we're mature enough and self-aware enough to say, okay, our justice system is going to determine whether the perspective of the person who behaved in a manner that caused harm, was that an innocent perspective or was it a guilty perspective? Were they intentionally seeking to do harm? And therefore, are they guilty? And that's what guilt is, isn't it? You feel guilty when you've done something intentionally and it's caused harm, and now you regret it. And so, if we can agree, that's the ideal way to determine justice, reattributive justice, which is how nature does it, then what's the purpose of punishment? Well, if you peel back the layers of punishment, underlying punishment is an intention to do harm. Understand this. That is not justice. That is not justice. When you want to punish someone, you are purposefully and intentionally seeking to do harm, not from an innocent perspective, but from a self-aware and conscious perspective. My intention is to do harm. And so understand, punishment, it will be a thing of the past in terms of the judicial system in the future. Reattributive justice, the way that nature does it, is how it is going to emerge. And I can see it as an innovation advisor working with frontier innovation every day in, the Web3 space, which is where a lot of, self-empowered and self-governed and self-deterministic organizations are emerging that are governing themselves. And I can tell you, it's an asset-based system. And the new system that emerges will be reattributive, restitution-based. And it will not be punishing people. It will be promoting self-responsibility. It will be promoting self-awareness, to be self-aware, and to be responsible for the impact of your influence on the ecosystem, and to indemnify you, and to indemnify yourself, to take it upon yourself, to indemnify future innocent behavior that inadvertently does harm. This is the future of justice. And so, as I'm speaking, I'm realizing that, maybe indemnity isn't the ideal name for this podcast. Maybe it is justice, but it's really important to understand that if you have an extreme view on something, whether it's crime and punishment, whether it's justice, whether it's finance, whether it's commerce, whether it's governance, self-determinism, centralized authorities, if you have an extreme view, it's really important. The sooner you can understand that extreme view, in order to express that extremity in its pure form, it has to erode its polarity. So, if there's absolute abundance, if we're in a state of absolute abundance, then we have to live in a reality within which it is entirely devoid of lack. So to experience the extreme of abundance, the absolute expression of abundance, where it is devoid of lack, you've also annihilated is the possibility of experiencing the emotion of gratitude, which can only arise when you're in a state of lack and then you receive. So if you don't ever want to feel gratitude again, if you are willing to take everything in your life for granted, if that's something you want, then an absolute state of abundance is what you want. But you actually don't want that. No human being wants to be in a state of absolute abundance. In fact, it is the most stagnant state that there is. To be in a state of total abundance, it is devoid of desire, because every potential has been fulfilled. It's been given before it's been asked for. And therefore, what you will desire from that state of being is you will desire to have nothing. That's the desire that arises within you. And this is the cycle that perpetuates the very universe we live in. So understand, if you're self-responsible and you want to experience gratitude in your life, then you purposefully constrain your life. You live at a baseline of deficit of the things you want to be grateful for. And I'll give you myself as an example. A lot of people don't really understand the way I live my life in terms of intimate relationships. So I'm what you would call a solo polyamorous. And so my baseline of my life is solitude. And the reason for that is so that I can be truly grateful for the experience of togetherness and connection. So when I see my friends, when I see my family, I've put time, and when that distance has given me the time and space for them to occupy space in my mind, where I've created a future event that means something to me, that's important to me, so that when I see them, it feels like a gift. And so in terms of I'm not interested in building a life with another human being that I love where we are in each other's pockets every day, because I don't ever want to take someone that I love for granted, because there's a state of total abundance of that connection. It's impossible to feel grateful for a connection that's always there. And this is the source of a lot of stagnation and a lot of relationships. And this is why I choose to have a state of solitude as my baseline experience, so I can truly appreciate and be grateful for the intimate connections and relationships that I do have in my life when I choose to have them. And, so solo polyamorous basically means that I'm open to intimate relationships, but I'm not prepared to, and I'm not into one night stands or any of that stuff. So it's like platonic friendships. And many of them that could potentially be intimate as well, but we don't go back to the same home together or anything like that. Now, that's definitely not everyone's cup of tea, but it's something that I cherish and that I really enjoy. And you can apply it to anything in life. You can apply it to your favorite food. If you've got a favorite food, if you have it every day, it won't be your favorite food for long. But if you deprive yourself of it purposefully for a month, and then spend that month allowing it to occupy space in your mind, knowing that there's an event that's going to come up where you're going to eat that food, you're going to think of a million different ways to experience that food. And when that moment comes, imagine the joy of eating that food a month later. You're a self-responsible human being. You can purposefully constrain your life in order to experience future moments of gratitude. You can be a grown-up whenever you want to. You can take responsibility and create any experience that you want to have. But if you want to be in a state of total abundance, you're going to be miserable straight away. Straight away. And interestingly enough, that state of stagnation, when you're in a state of absolute abundance, just on the other side of it is a state of being devoid of everything. It's very close to the 0 point, where everything and nothing basically coexist. So, punishment. If you want to punish people, you are guilty yourself. And this is the nature of the judicial system that will arise. And it will arise from the ground up. It's not going to be, the new wave of the new economy, they are self-responsible. I don't think they truly understand what that means. How much responsibility comes with being totally free. A great deal of responsibility comes with it. And, first and foremost, responsibility for your state of awareness, your conscious awareness, and the taking on the responsibility for inadvertently doing harm due to your innocent perspective. They are the pillars of the judicial system that's coming, and they form part of the protocol that I've been developing for many, many years that's infused into a mechanism for smart contracting that bridges the worlds of common law and statute. So yeah, I'm going to leave it there. I am going to call it indemnity. This is the nature of indemnity. And my hope is that a few lights have gone on in this, and that this will inspire you to perhaps pursue some quotes on personal indemnity insurance or professional. And that in parallel to that you may feel inspired or compelled even to invest in actively developing your state of conscious self-awareness. Okay, that's it for now. Catch you soon.